So basically what I was saying, that there are real challenges when it comes to doing the work, and a lot of it has to deal with the privilege that some people enjoy and feeling at times attacked because they have those privileges. Based on the examples that I was sharing about my own self, I think what's significant for us to remember is that your privilege doesn't make you a bad person, but recognizing that you have privilege and there's ways that you experience the world. And it is possible for people to have privilege and have areas of oppression that they struggle with in the real world. So for example, with me, I talked about my male privilege. I talked about my able-bodied privilege. But I also experienced oppression based on my race, based on my religion. All of those things are things that are a reality for many, many people. When we think about our organizations, in particular about diversity, it's not enough to just have bodies that look different than ours or people who are different from us, but it is significant and important for us to think about what are the experiences and how do we support the people that we bring in who may have different lived experiences so that they can be successful within the organization, knowing that a lot of times systems and structures do not support people who don't fit a particular type of mold. Remember, like what I was saying in the beginning, a lot of colonial laws were constructed in ways that makes indigenous people, makes black people, makes people of color, marginalized people be the other. And then there's a standard by which everyone is judged. That standard is often skewed by the people who created those standards to begin with. So when I talk to CEOs, for example, and they talk to me about their best hire, I talk to them about, well, best hire for whom? When I would do hiring, often I would hire people who would share my vision, but not necessarily the path. And I would mentor those folks and try to push them so that they would be comfortable challenging me and knowing that their jobs are not in jeopardy if they're challenging me. And then once we get to some kind of consensus, then we work together towards whatever that consensus is. And I think that those are the things, the ways that we need to do. If we know that the laws and structures have been created in ways that allow some people to be more successful, then a part of what the organization needs to do is to actually give people whose voices have been marginalized, silenced, people who are selectively unheard, more space to be able to speak. And not just speak, the people who have power need to help the other people in the organization understand that they have to listen to those voices. So you see it, for example, with organizations that want to go in and support indigenous communities, but they haven't consulted with elders. They have not consulted with the communities that they want to go in to serve. They might have one person whose views might mirror their own, but it wasn't something where it was based on relationships, where it was active listening to communities, where the solutions were co-created. And so then the organization can have goals. Well, we will do X, Y, and Z. They go into communities, they do it, and then it causes damage. So I'll give you an example. When I was a teacher, I took a group of students to another country. Most of the students were privileged, coming from privileged backgrounds, and we were going into an impoverished community in terms of socioeconomic status, not in terms of life experiences and the other amazing things that we learned from them, but in terms of socioeconomic status. We were going into a community like that. And it was really important for me to spend a couple months with those students ahead of time, helping them understand that, one, we were not going into the community to fix it or to save people. Another thing that I did not let them do, I didn't let them take, suitcases of clothes and shoes to give to the community, folks who were there, for the simple reason that we didn't have enough to give to everyone. You go in and you give some and you don't give to others. What you end up doing is you fracture the community, you develop have and have nots, and then you feel good about yourself, but you end up doing damage to that community. And so it's important when we develop solutions that they're grounded in the realities of communities, that we're not going in with this idea that we know better, that we're going to fix and save. I mean, if you think about the state of the world today, where we are with things like global warming, where we are with things with environmental destruction and disaster, the greatest learning we can gain now would be from indigenous nations. And because they have lived in sync with nature for tens of thousands of years. We have not privileged that knowledge. We have not privileged that as expertise. We often look at expertise in particular ways. The same thing about when we talk about medicine. We privilege allopathic medicine, Western medicine, which is about 150 years old. And I'm not saying, don't hear me say that allopathic medicine is bad. But there are other forms of medicine that have existed for thousands of years that we dismiss now as being alternative, when the reality is the youngest form of medicine is really allopathic medicine, or one of the youngest forms of medicine. And so we tend to go into spaces with a colonial mindset, with a construct of what is best and what is good, and we impose that on whole groups of people based on our understanding, and that understanding does a lot of damage and destruction. When you hire people who are significantly different than yourself, but they share the goals that your organization has, then what that's going to do is to be able to support your organization to work in a good way with those communities, to rise to service excellence, to be able to serve your clientele in a way that is culturally responsive and relevant, in ways that are significant, and in ways that's going to help your organization to be successful. And that's the most important thing. I've seen it in a lot of community organization. The boards are most often, for example, male heavy. If they're not just male heavy, they're from a particular demographic, particular class. They don't want to hear from people who are different than them. They dismiss their voices. The structures they create reflect what they think is important, and they end up missing out whole groups of people. And then what ends up happening is we disaffect entire groups of people who do not want to engage with our organizations. And then when they express that as frustration, and when they express anger, then we get upset because we think that they're not willing to play nicely with us. And that always sets up a them and us dynamic. That them and us dynamic is actually something that is significant to leading to harm within organizations. So I think overall, if I was to say, anything else, I would say look at the diversity in your organizations, assess who's on your boards, who are your staff, who's the populations that you're servicing. How does your staff reflect the diversity of who you serve, up to and including your most marginalized people that you serve? How do they reflect those realities? How do you determine? You need to think about how you determine what your goals are. Have they been co-created with the most marginalized communities that you serve, and in collaboration? And then how do you measure? So the measurement has to look at whether or not your intent matches your impact. The other thing that we have to remember is that structures and that our structures and systems, they drive behavior, they drive our processes, they drive our policies. Our policies on their own are a type of system and structure. They drive our behavior, but they also reflect values and attitudes. And we have to think about whether or not what we're saying in our organization is that our values and attitudes in terms of how rules and policies were created are the best, who decided they were the best, by whom, for whom, and how do we actually think about our structures in ways that they're constantly transforming to best serve our clients. That's the thing that we want to think about. The other thing that I would say is we have to talk about social identity. We have to think about who is in the space, and we have to look at varying social identities. I mentioned some of them: race, class, gender, sexual orientation, immigration status, language status, education levels, indigenous identities. All of these things are significant, and you have to be active as an organization in seeking out those voices and making sure they are present. That means that sometimes getting to decisions will be challenging. But if you're the ones leading the organization, the challenges that you're getting there is going to get you to a better place. So what that means is that ideas around coherence and consistency in your organization does not have to be oppositional to creativity and to innovation. We have to think about them as two hands together, as supporting each other. That's the way that we are going to get better at serving people well. And ultimately, to remember that, none of us are equitable by nature. I've been doing this work for 20 years. I would not say that I'm equitable. I would always say that I continue to learn about equity, because ultimately it's about how do we ensure service excellence to every individual person. And so what that means is that I'm constantly learning. What it means is that I need to not know all the solutions, but I need to know the questions to ask. I need to think about what are the privileges that I have that would not allow me to be aware of some of the realities of other groups of people, not to make my reality the de facto or default thing that I resort to as being the standard best thing. And instead recognize equity and an anti-oppressive stance as a leadership competency. Just like we recognize other leadership skills that leaders need to have, we need to recognize that this is a leadership skill. And if it's one thing that I would say that this is something that we often miss in our organizations. I would also say that sending people to an equity workshop is not enough. It does not support a healthy organization. It does help with baseline learning, but the other things that it does is that it helps. What we want to do is explicitly embed the equity pieces. We want to explicitly embed that in the work that we do, so that equity is not siloed to the side, but it's seen as the way that we do our work to get towards our goals and measures. So how is this being done equitably? Those are some general principles that I think in many sectors, I wouldn't just say not-for-profits, but in many sectors, that's where we want to be able to be focused on, especially when we understand that the work that our organizations do, they play an important role, a significant role in supporting communities and supporting individuals, sometimes people in really dire situations, being able to help them get to the best place that they can get to be able to do better. So on that note, I'm just going to end here. I'm going to thank you. I apologize once again for the technical difficulty in the middle, and hopefully this was valuable. Thank you.